afternoon. I see we've got one student and a couple other people participating. Hello, Joan. Hello, Sarah. We're just going to give it a few more minutes to let everybody come on. So we're not ignoring you. Just we'll wait a couple minutes and see who else is coming on, and then we'll get started. So it may be that I don't see all the boxes because it looks like we have, oh, here we go. We're at 13 now. So people are filling in. We'll just give it a few more minutes so that people can hear introductions. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And as people come on, hopefully they can just catch up. My name is Amy Galloway. I'm an undergrad graduate of University of Florida, political science, many moons ago, and a double gator in that I had received my Juris Doctorate from the Levin College of Law at Florida as well. Welcome this afternoon to our discussion on pre-law and career options. We've got a great group of 3 panelists that I think you all are going to really enjoy hearing from. And I would invite you to be interactive. If you have questions, please feel free to raise your Zoom hand and we'll get to you, or you can put a question in the chat and we'll try to get to all of those as well. But what I'd like to start with is just an introduction. So I told you who I am, Amy Galloway, or maybe I told you I was a gator and didn't tell you my name. I apologize. And we have with us 3 panel members. I'll first introduce our jurist, the Honorable Marcia Morales Howard. Judge Howard is a United States District Court judge in the Middle District of Florida. She'll tell you more what all that entails. She took the bench in 2007 after serving for 3 or 4 years as a magistrate in the U.S. court system as well. Prior to that, she had a long career in private practice before she began her career as in public service as a federal judge. We also have Ms. Gwen Griggs. Gwen is the co-founder and also served as general counsel for a technology / legal practice support company by the name of Advos Legal and Advos Pro. Gwen is a graduate, as is Judge Howard. I didn't mention, I apologize. They're both, in fact, all 3 of our panel members are graduates of Florida. Gwen is a graduate of the College of Law at University of Florida as well. And she graduated in 1993, Judge Howard in 1990. And then we have State Attorney Melissa Nelson. State Attorney Nelson is the state attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit. She also is a graduate of the University of Florida College of Law in 1997. With us also are members from the DC. Come on a screen so that our panelists can see you when they're answering you or speaking with you. And then obviously, you know, I'd love to have you interact face to face as we do on Zoom, you know, when you're speaking directly. So what I wanted to do is just start with each of our panel members and ask them to summarize for us, what is your job? You know, what are you doing in your legal career now? So I'd like to start with you, Judge Howard, and just let the undergrads know what you do and what it means to be a United States District Court judge.
Okay, sure. Well, hello, everybody. As Amy said, I'm Marcia Howard. I'm a United States District Judge for the Middle District of Florida. The Middle District of Florida goes from Jacksonville on the north end down through Ocala, Orlando, Tampa, and Fort Myers. It's about 35 of the 67 counties of the state and 60% of the state's population. So it's a really, really busy court, where I think we have one of the top 10 highest caseloads in the country. We don't specialize in federal court. So as a district judge or as a magistrate judge in federal court, you are assigned any cases, whether they're civil or criminal, that are filed in federal court. And those of you who've taken civil procedure know that in addition to federal cases, we hear state cases based on diversity jurisdiction. So what it means is that on any given day, we can be working on a patent case in the morning and a slip and fall at Target in the afternoon, or a child pornography case. Just, it really runs the full gamut. So every day is different. Some days there's more time in court. A lot of what we do though in federal court is deciding matters on the papers. So it's a lot of reading and a lot of writing and a lot of personal quiet time with cases, lots of stacks of cases. Doesn't sound very exciting, does it?
It actually does sound exciting, I'm sure, especially the time you spend in court, because as some of our students may know, and we'll learn more of hopefully in this panel, the breadth of the federal cases is everything from multi-million-dollar suits to, major crimes. So it's quite the job, and we're very happy to have you with us this afternoon. State Attorney Nelson, could you also share with the panel just a little bit of what you do and oversee? I know you have a large staff, and what it's like to be a prosecutor for your circuit.
Sure, thanks. First, let me say thanks for having me today. It's so fun to be with two of my friends, Gwen and Judge Howard. I have such great respect for both of them. So I'm very honored to be in their company today. So I'm an elected official, and the Fourth Circuit is comprised of 3 counties in the state: Duval County, where Jacksonville is, and then south of us, Clay County, and north of us, Nassau County. So I represent a little over 1 million people and run an office of about 330 people, made up of about 120 lawyers. And then the rest is support staff, investigative staff, paralegals, victim advocates who support the work we do. And we're charged with prosecuting the criminal statutes, state statutes in Florida. So while Judge Howard is in federal court, we're in state court. And we are, unlike what Judge Howard was saying is the breadth of her work, we are focused only on violations of criminal law. So we don't practice civil law. And we work with law enforcement to make cases, and then we're in courtrooms on the cases that we can bring, if we can meet our standard, trying those cases and resolving those cases. So I started my legal career as what we call a line prosecutor, trying cases, putting cases together. And I did that for 12 years. And then I went into private practice, and all 3 of us, I think, went through the same firm, spent some time there, and then ran for office 8 years ago and came back here. And so my job today looks very different than my job as a line prosecutor, because I'm much more now involved with the development of policy, the management of the office, personnel decisions, HR decisions, things like that. So some parts of it are really exciting and fun, and some are very mundane.
That's very interesting, because you're basically running a small business and also representing the people and prosecuting cases and assisting victims and trying to bring people to justice. So that's another broad scope of a legal career. So
except our business doesn't make any money.
Neither does mine.
Okay, and then last but not least, Ms. Griggs, could you please share with the students and us what you do and how you got there?
For sure. And I think it's just so fascinating that we all practiced at the same law firm. doing very, very, very similar work at one point in our career. And now, fast forward 10 or 15 years or maybe 20, I don't know. But, and we're all doing such wildly different work. And Melissa, you probably don't know this, but I clerked my first summer at the state attorney's office in special prosecution. So that is my one little tiny, experience with what you do, but really grateful that the world has both of you to do the work you're doing, because sometimes it can be even less than thankless, right? It can be the target of a lot. So appreciate that we have really good people doing that. So I mentioned we were at McGuire Woods together. We were at Big Law doing very similar work. And my path, I went to become the general counsel of a company. And in a general counsel role, you're doing a lot of different things, but you're doing it for one client. And I had a small firm, went back to be the general counsel, and then about 10 years ago, just believed there was a different way to practice law. So we are outsourced general counsel for growth stage companies, and that's really the lion's share of the work we do. We have started separately practice management, really a training and consulting practice to help other lawyers build practices that move away from billable hour in particular, because I think the billable hour makes practicing law challenging, right? It creates a bit of a conflict with your client. So we've done away with that. But 90% of my work is still serving as general counsel, which is really the gamut of some level of employment law, corporate governance, raising capital, transactions. We help, usually they call it sell side. Usually we help someone sell. We do everything other than, Amy, you were saying litigation. We do no litigation. So the things that Judge Howard and Melissa do in court, that I stay out of court. I try to avoid court, right, and resolve things pre-dispute, pre-litigation. So that's in a nutshell.
Okay. And I recognize to our students, that's a lot to unpack, right? You just heard 3 very varied types of legal careers, and obviously people who are very well established in what they're doing. So you may be scratching your head a little bit, but that's where you can jump in, and if you have questions about, okay, tell me more about general counsel, or tell me how do you prepare for general counsel, that's all great. Like what I would do is really, again, ask our panel members, and and then they can talk amongst themselves too. But I wondered, and you may want to just let the group know what your undergrad study was as well, because that's where they are now, right? But did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer, or was there something, some situation or something that you were exposed to that really was a major factor in you saying, Melissa, if you would kind of tell us if you had that pivotal moment, or did you always know this is what you wanted to do?
I wanted to stay in Gainesville for 3 more football seasons. I originally I graduated with a communications degree. I was actually focused on journalism, and I really wanted to be a TV journalist. And I guess my pivotal moment, I can remember sitting in a journalism class, and there was a panel similar to what we're doing now with a group of television journalists. And they were talking about, well, what I remember from the panel is how challenging the work was, how competitive it was, how backstabbing it was, how it was a very negative, my takeaway was negative. And so I decided then to change my major from journalism to advertising, and I just loved communications. I ended up in a speech class, and I loved putting together a speech. I liked listening to the other people in the class present speeches. And so that geared me towards law school. But I'd always liked, my dad was in law enforcement, and I was always interested in his cases. And so it ended up being a very good fit for my interests. And then when I got to law school, I got very involved with trial advocacy, which ultimately took me to my job as a trial attorney and prosecutor.
I was different. Amy,
Very
you told us
good.
earlier
What
that
about you, Gwen? Was there?
Oh, Judge Howard, you want to go? Amy, you're breaking up a little
Okay.
bit. And so if
Yeah.
you hear us jump in, it's probably because we couldn't hear you. So
Okay, I'm on a
just,
hotel internet, so it may not be that great. Yeah, so you were getting ready to say something, Judge Howard, so please.
so. I was saying that you told us that you decided you wanted to be a lawyer at 8 o'clock at the age of 8. I did the same thing. I decided at the age of 13 that I wanted to be a lawyer for odd reason. I read a newspaper article about a little girl that was not being allowed to go to school because she was a dwarf, and they wouldn't allow her to attend the public school. And it bothered me, and that made me start thinking about law. And then I met a family friend who was a lawyer, and started talking to her about it, and really just decided that that's what I wanted to do. But my family is from Cuba, and nobody in the family had ever been a lawyer. So my parents really didn't take me seriously. They thought this was just kind of a phase I was going through. So when I went to college, my father insisted that I major in something practical. So I went to Vanderbilt and I majored in economics, which wasn't practical. And the only practical effect it had was to blast my GPA because I hated economics. So that wasn't a wise choice. I would suggest majoring in something that you actually enjoy and care about and do well in, because your GPA matters for law school. But I never did change my mind or waver from wanting to be a lawyer. Now, I never thought I would be a judge. That came much later. I wasn't like, I talked to a lot of young law students and they tell me they want to be a judge. I hadn't thought about that. It was a family friend who was a judge well into my career that recommended that I think about it. Gwen?
you want me to jump in? So this is funny. I've known you for 3 decades and I never heard the story about reading the article. And this is going to be so funny because I wanted to become a lawyer when I was 11. I did a paper on Brown versus Board of Education and decided that if Thurgood Marshall could come from pretty humble background and make such a big impact on the world. So it's funny that the school tie is in there too, like people being able to attend school. That was my motivation. And I never wavered from wanting to be a lawyer either. I had a different path though. So I ended up at UNF knowing I wanted to go to law school, and about 3 years in, I just said, what am I going to get a degree in? Because all I've done is taking classes that I like. And I was 1 semester away from a political science degree. And they said, you can graduate early with a sociology degree. And I said, sign me up. I'll be a sociology major, because I just was trying to get into law school. So your advice of take classes that you really like so you can get a good GPA, I second that. It certainly is true.
I wanted to major in political science.
Yeah, I was one credit away, but it would have kept me there another semester, and I didn't see the point. So I just kept going. Yeah, and then did well in school, and so had the opportunity to work in big law, which it's just a great group of people and mentors and really sharp people that can help you refine your skills and learn from people that have great ethics. And then sort of fast forward and say, I still want to change the world, right? I still want to make an impact and do good. So how can I take all the things I've done and all the things I've learned and try to make an impact? So that was the career.
There was a comment earlier about us handling really serious crimes in federal court. the truth is that Melissa Nelson as our state attorney, they see the really, really serious, heinous crimes. We don't, you know, if in order for there to be a murder prosecuted in federal court, it's got to involve a federal official, or it's got to be it's very narrow. What the state attorney's office does, they deal with the really heinous crimes. They have real victims all the time. And it's just, to me, the job that she has is one of the most important in our community. And, you know, it's amazing that she is able to do it and balance it in the way she does. But it is a hard job. You are dealing with real people, real lives every single day. And we do in federal court, but it's different. It's markedly different.
Judge, Amy, are you on? I didn't know if you had a question. You are still, looks like maybe frozen. Okay, so we opened close to 50,000 files last year across our 3 counties. I see we've got with us today a student, Sia Aleem, who summered with us last summer. So it's funny, Gwen, that you mentioned that you too had summered in this office. And one of my colleagues, Lisa Page, is on too. So we opened thousands of files.
And Sia interned with us like maybe a year and a half ago. So
oh my gosh, this is so crazy, the connections. I love it. But what we actually file and prosecute is actually only a fraction, a percentage of crimes that occur. And that's because many crimes go unreported. And then in addition to those that are reported, many don't meet the standard, don't come with the standard of proof that we require before we formally institute prosecution. So what we are doing in court is sadly and unfortunately just a percentage of crime that's going on around us. In my circuit, Jacksonville, where Judge Howard lives, and Gwen, you're down in, are you at St. Johns County now?
St. John's.
So a different county, but so Jacksonville we have lead the state actually in homicide, and we're flanked by 2 counties, 2 more rural counties, growing counties that have such different challenges. So when I go to those counties and talk to different groups and ask the communities there what they're facing, it's nothing like the cases that we're dealing with in Jacksonville. In fact, Clay County, one thing that Lisa, who's on here, is working very closely with me on in the office is solving cold cases. So those are homicide cases that have grown cold and are unsolved. And we're looking back, sometimes it's 10 years, sometimes 20 years. We just announced solving a cold case that was 30 years old. And so Duval County, when we started this project and looked at the spectrum of cases, there are thousands of cold cases in Duval County. There's a handful in Clay County and a handful in Nassau County, which just underscores the differences in we're all part of one circuit, but the differences and the challenges facing those communities and the differences in what the office here in Jacksonville deals with as opposed to in Nassau County and Clay County.
You know, and Judge Howard, a few minutes ago, you said that you spend a lot of your time reading cases, and maybe it sounds boring, but I think as the students think about, who they are, right, and what do they love, right, the work you do is incredibly intellectually challenging, right? You've got the people who are bringing cases, some of them cases of public note, right, like some of the redistricting cases, and you're hearing a group of lawyers who are very sharp present their cases, their opinion, and another group, and you're trying to make the decision in between. Which, when I think about when a lot of us were going to law school, it was that intellectual challenge that made it interesting and compelling. And so, just clarifying that it definitely, it uses your brain, and for people who love to do that, and sort of philosophy and logic and things like that. That's a huge part of it.
Gwen, I have a question for you. So what you're doing, first of all, sounds so neat. Are you the
Thank
first
you.
in the country to come up with this concept? Did you copy it from someone else? And if you are the first, has it been modeled by others?
So for Advos Pro, we have a patent filed. So patent pending to a way to move away from billable hours and still have something to measure, because I think that's you guys in the profession know that has been a conversation for a long time. What is the alternative fee structure going to be? But finding a way to do it that is still measurable and we can report back to our clients on what we have done. And frankly, probably both of you, right? You measure the things that your constituents matter, right? Like how many cases, how many decisions have you rendered? How many wins? Like things that matter. And in my opinion, hours are not the things that our clients really want, right? They want the deal closed or they want the transaction handled. So the fun part that we've done in the last probably year or so, we've started training lawyers around the country and even one in Canada to move away from the billable hour. So
that's really cool. So in addition to being a lawyer, you're also an entrepreneur. That's really neat.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's funny too, because you go back to like, how do you change the world, right? And I think today, entrepreneurs really do have the opportunity to come up with something new and creative and have an impact. So while it seems wildly different than what motivated me all those years ago, there's a thread that ties it all together of having that impact.
And I think,
Melissa, can I ask you a question? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Judge.
I was just going to say, I think one thing about Gwen's career, and I experienced this myself, is so often young lawyers and law students think they have to know exactly what they're going to do when they come out. And the truth is you really don't. You just start in whatever path you go down, and if you don't like it, you find a way to change it. I was doing insurance defense at a firm, and I was getting great experience, but I didn't like insurance defense. And then I had the experience to work on one labor and employment case. Now, coming out of law school, I had an offer at what was then the labor and employment boutique in the country. And I turned it down because I didn't want to be an employment lawyer. I thought that sounded awful. Well, I took this one employment case and thought, oh, wow, this is fascinating. I really like this. And I discovered federal court. State court to me was a little bit like the Wild Wild West, and I'm a rule person, so I really liked the structure of federal court. And I just moved my practice in that direction, which is how I ended up becoming a magistrate judge and then a federal judge. But that was all just because I sort of recognized I like law, I like doing law, but I don't like this kind of law. I don't like what I'm doing right now. And Gwen has changed several times, and so I think you'll find that one thing that I just tell young people is try not to put so much pressure on yourself to figure out the rest of your life. Frankly, even if you try and figure it out, it's not going to go that way. So stop trying. Melissa, would you agree with that? You've changed a lot.
I totally agree. I also think change is healthy. I mean, the generation on listening to us right now, very, very different than when we were coming up. So change is actually, I think, part of their reality and all things now. But I think just starting at the beginning, like you said, I had no idea. You said you had never thought of being a judge. The idea that I would ever run for political office was nowhere in any dreams I had of my life. I had never contemplated that. It wasn't on my bucket list at all. But your work, and as you continue, and the people that you meet take you, and the ideas that you have take you down different paths, and being open to those different paths, I think is really important, and not deciding what your life is going to look like, because I think we can all agree the best intentions will not work out.
I will just remind you that I tried to get you to apply to be a federal judge, and you declined to follow that path.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that state court, federal court distinction too, because that the state attorney's office, one of the reasons I said this isn't for me was just the sheer volume of cases that you're going to be handed. And my personality, like I need to feel like I'm really prepared. And so I was like, oh, I will not thrive there. But I do think that practice of law, that's one of the beautiful things. Like I litigated my first 4 years of practice, and I was in a big enough firm that I could move from litigation to corporate, right? And I had no idea what corporate law was and wouldn't have known as an 11-year-old, that's what I want to do. But putting, what both of you said, being open, and the world is going to change too. And so artificial intelligence, AI, huge right now. Like 10 years ago, nobody would have said, I'm going to become an AI lawyer, right? But you just follow, and then, and experience and learn from the experiences of what you don't want too. Like that's a huge part of it as well.
That's
Absolutely.
a really important lesson. I think we all know, like I wanted to be an environmental lawyer. I was dead set sure that's what I was going to spend my entire career. And it's still a passion of mine. But I went to Florida. I took environmental law, hated every minute of it, couldn't stand even, it was so much science and I wasn't expecting that. And it was so regulatorily dense and heavy. And so you pivot to something else, and that's part of what you're doing in undergrad. And that's part of what you're going to continue to do if you pursue a career in law. State Attorney Nelson, I'm curious that if our students think that they want to be prosecutors, or maybe they want to be public defenders, maybe they want to represent, the defendant who's been charged with the crime. Is there any advice you or any other of our panel members could give them as a way to expose them or give them an opportunity to see if they like that side of the law?
So first of all, let me say, so while I'm a prosecutor, becoming a public defender is very noble, very important. The people who represent those accused and are ensuring that their constitutional rights are respected are incredibly valuable and necessary in our system. So whether a student who decides to go to law school decides to take that path or the path of prosecution, both are really important for the criminal justice system to work. And so you heard Gwen mention that she spent a summer here. That's been a long-standing practice in the institution of this office. And Lisa, who's on the call, actually oversees our summer program. Sia was part of it. And so I would love to hear, her thoughts as well. But students come, it's non-paid, but they have an internship throughout the summer. And we try to make it really fun and expose them to the courtrooms and allow them to work hand in glove with the lawyers on cases. And sometimes they get to do, depending on the division they're in, some really neat work. And so that's the best way to get a sense for whether or not you might like it. And Judge Howard and Gwen are both correct. Federal court and the structure around federal court, the pace of federal court, the volume in federal court, at least is different than in state court. It's funny that she described it like the Wild Wild West, and that's not for everybody. And the other thing I would recommend, in addition to actually coming to an office and spending some time, is if those on this call actually go to law school, obviously moot court's important if you're going to be an appellate lawyer. If you think you might want to be a trial lawyer, getting involved in the trial clinics or the trial teams, that's the best way to get a sense for, do you like this? Because while it is mock, it still brings the same level of anxiety and nerves to bear when you're standing and presenting, and you're using the same skills that we use in real life. So I would say, and I would echo what both Gwen and Judge Howard have said about spending your time on the things that you like. I mean, Amy, you said you decided you hated environmental law. So spending your time and energy on the things, because that's what will ultimately make you most successful in whatever it is that you do, I think.
Yes. And I know Judge Howard, at least when I was a federal law clerk, we we were all graduates of law school already, but is there any advice you would give to students that think, okay, I'm hearing a little bit about billable hours and private practice, but I've always thought that my passion might be, a public defender or a what they call AUSA, assistant U.S. attorneys in the federal system. Is there any advice you could give to the panel members of how they might be exposed or learn a little more about that? I'm sorry, not to the panel members, to the students.
Yeah. So we don't have a lot of opportunities for college students in the federal court. There's a variety of reasons for that. The best program that I know of to get exposure is the one that Melissa Nelson and Lisa Page run over in the state court. You get so much exposure to real life legal work and the way learning how they build cases and how they try cases, and you're in the courthouse, so you get to go watch court proceedings a lot. So I would encourage anybody to apply for that. But also, if you can get exposure to working a law office during the summers or anything like that, whether it's paid or unpaid. I spent 3 summers working at a law office here in Jacksonville, and decided that there was no way in hell. My father was a real estate developer. There was no way in hell I was going to do real estate law. It was mind-numbingly boring, I discovered at that law firm. But there was one lawyer there that was a litigator, and I was fascinated by what he did. And so it confirmed in my mind that that's the direction I wanted to go in. But I would say that to the extent that you can do anything that gets you exposure to see sort of the day-to-day, what is it like to be in that space? What does a morning look like? What does the afternoon look like? What do the weekends look like? Anything like that. Now, once somebody is in law school, then you have opportunities to intern with the federal court, with the state courts, with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I would strongly encourage anybody who, once they're in law school, to apply for those internships and to spend a summer at one of those places where you get to see all different aspects of the law and not just sort of one narrow alley. Even in the U.S. Attorney's Office, one difference between the U.S. Attorney and the state attorney is the U.S. Attorney's Office actually does civil and criminal. So even an internship with them exposes you to both areas, just like an internship with a magistrate judge or a district judge will let you see a wide variety of stuff.
Right. And I should point out that just like State Attorney Nelson has a robust program for summer internships and then in law school for law school interns, most other state attorneys throughout the state have similar programs. So, me being practicing primarily in Miami and then most of my career in Fort Lauderdale, our state attorney, Mike Satz for many years, but he had a program that would allow undergrads to come and spend the summer, similar to yours, which I know of several, students who did that when they were undergrad, and that really solidified for them, this is for me, and really helped them with their decision to go into law school. I have a question. It might sound a little odd, but I think it might be interesting. What's the one thing you didn't expect, either that was super hard or just didn't expect about going to law school? In other words, you spent all that time getting good grades and taking the LSATs and applying to your law schools, and then you got there and you were like, wow, I didn't expect this, or I didn't think there'd be this much of this. Gwen, is there something that sticks out in your mind?
I am going to answer that question. I do want to jump back real quick and say I was a runner for a law firm, and that
Me too.
that experience back in the day when you actually filed things with the court, right? Like that job's not there anymore, but I'm sure there's something similar. But what it did for me when I went to law school was when I'm reading cases and they talk about a deposition, I understood what a deposition looked like. And I understood what a corporate record book looked like. And you wouldn't know that when you start reading those cases and they talk. So that practical side of lawyering, I think, is super valuable. And I will say, I wish I had taken more finance and business classes, because the work that I do today right? I almost call it an on-the-job MBA because I have to know finance terms in order to put deals together. And I wish I had taken more of those classes. So if you're interested in kind of the deal making side, then I would encourage that. The thing I would say that I was most surprised about was, and I don't tell this story very much, but I'm gonna tell it here. So I'm very used to getting really great grades. And I went to law school and my first semester, they posted the grades at the time, and I had a 2.78 and I bawled. I called my now husband and said, I apparently am not supposed to be a lawyer. Like I couldn't even get a B. And so the understanding, and I ended up graduating with honors. So like the thing that surprised me the most was the way the grading system works, and appreciating too that just because you got a B or a C when you're not used to getting B's and C's, that it really doesn't have anything to do with whether you're going to be a great lawyer. So
Yeah. And I remember
that
when
was
they
my
used to
biggest surprise.
posting those grades was brutal.
Was
You're all
yes.
huddling around the bulletin board
Yes.
trying to find yourself and not cry. Right.
Yeah. And I really told him, I was like, oh, all this, apparently I'm not supposed to do this. Like, I must be a failed, anyway. So
Well,
Glad I
adversity
was-
makes us stronger.
yes.
Yes.
But,
What about you? What about you, Melissa? Was there something that really you weren't expecting about the experience that might be good for our Gators to think about as they're heading down this path?
So I remember like the first week, the Socratic method freaked me out. The amount of reading was definitely a shock to me, very different than I had experienced. And the idea that one exam at the end of the semester was the entirety of your grade. I was used to getting credit for being prepared and showing up and working hard, which you could do with, I don't know if there was a homework grade or something but having everything. So that was a lot of stress, not unique to me. Everybody felt it. So yes, the amount of work and the duration of the work before you were actually tested on it was certainly, I wasn't prepared for that. And I don't know why, because that is true of law school, but I did not know that when I was applying to law school and had been accepted. So that was a surprise.
You make a good point. Yeah. Go ahead, Judge Howard.
In the same way, the thing that most surprised me was the class sizes. I had gone to a small high school and at Vanderbilt we had small classes, and I don't know why I was so surprised, because that's all the law schools were this big. But I walked into that room and there were 100 people in the room, and I was terrified, and I would not raise my hand. I wouldn't ask questions. I remember being really embarrassed one day when the person sitting beside me read the question that I'd written in the margin of my notes, and it was a good question. So she raised her hand and asked it. And it took me a long time to get over feeling like I was definitely the dumbest person in the room, to get the nerve to speak, other than when I had to because they called on me. So that was terrifying for me.
Yeah. The Socratic method, which everyone's generally familiar with, and there's an now ancient movie called Paper Chase, which kind of is the first year experience of law at Harvard, I think it is, which is a great old movie if any of you want to find it somewhere. But yeah, the Socratic method with this very esteemed professor, staring at you from behind the podium, and 100 people in your section, and they're calling on you and asking you to brief a case that you were supposed to read. And it is frightening, but it's great fodder for learning how to think on your feet and have confidence in yourself and your ability to express yourself. So that the process is part of the education, along with all of the other things they do now in law school, with the mock trial and the trial teams and the law review and all these other extracurricular activities that you can do. And then the reading is also something that I think is important for, you've got to like to read if you're going to go to law school, because you're going to be reading and writing too. I mean, the exam is a one-time thing, but you have to write, especially in your first year, if you're going to try to write on to law review, if you're going to try to get on to moot court and be writing your briefs. But you've got to like to read, and you've got to learn how to read quickly and synthesize. So that's something you should think about yourself. You know, you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't want to read 100 pages a night, you know, you're gonna be challenged when you're in law school. Looking back on it, is there anything you wish someone would have told you? I mean, I just gave you my advice on you better like to read, or at least learn how to read efficiently. But is there anything that you wish someone would have whispered in your ear before you started law school, or even before you started your career, that you think would have been valuable? And I'll start with you, Judge Howard. And it might have been a class, it might have been, you know, someone anything.
I don't think I appreciated the difference between, let's say, medical school and law school. When you go to medical school, when you come out on the other side of that, you know how to be a doctor. Law school doesn't really teach you how to be a lawyer. You learn some basic legal principles, but what law school is doing is teaching you how to think. They're teaching you what to do when a client walks into the office and hemorrhages information. They tell you all these things, most of which are irrelevant. And hopefully law school has taught you the critical thinking, that you know the questions to ask to tease out what's important from that person and figure out what advice do they really need. So, but law school starts that process, but you've got to go out and practice and do it before you can actually do it successfully. And I did not appreciate that. I thought you go to law school, you become a lawyer, you know what you're doing. Well, you go to law school, you become a lawyer, and you have no idea what you're doing. You have to get good mentors. You have to work with people who you trust and respect that will lead you the right way. You have to be prepared to recognize that not everyone you work with is going to be a good role model. Gwen and I had the experience of working with somebody. If we had followed down the path that person was suggesting, neither of us would be where we are today. And so you have to remember that you're learning from these people, but you've got to trust your gut instincts and never let one decision, one case, cause you to sacrifice your integrity, because as Melissa and Gwen will tell you, it takes a long time to build a good reputation. It only takes one case or one failure to keep your word to destroy a good reputation.
Yeah, that's important, that reputations, I mean, whether it's a trial lawyer that appears before the same judges frequently, whether it's you're doing transactions and your client's trying to pressure you into doing something that isn't appropriate, that's what you have to stand on. And it really is a profession. It is, and ethics really count. That's a really good point.
Look, Amy, if I can say something else about that, because I don't think people realize this, but it's entirely true. You have civil litigators and you have criminal litigators. I did civil law my entire career. I didn't do any criminal work except when one of our clients' kids got a speeding ticket and I would have to go down to the courthouse to see if we could get a withhold of adjudication. When the biggest surprise to me after about 6 months of being a magistrate judge was the realization that criminal lawyers were far more civil with one another than the civil litigators. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the criminal lawyers, two things. One, it's a limited bar. And so at any given time, you probably have more than one case with this other lawyer. You can't back down on your word or fail to be honest with them in one case because you've got all these other cases with them. The other thing is civil lawyers are often fighting about money. In the criminal law area, it's people's lives. And you have to live to fight again another day for another human being. And that makes a big difference. And so that was probably the most surprising thing to me when I became a judge, was seeing the professionalism extended amongst the criminal bar, as opposed to the civil lawyers that were much more willing to have the scorched earth mentality.
Right.
And Melissa,
right.
you saw both sides of that, so I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
I should absolutely share the same sentiment. So when I practiced as a criminal prosecutor, then went into private practice, and when I was saying I think change is good, it was the first time I had represented a client, had a client, learned how to communicate with a client, learned the things that Judge Howard just mentioned. But what really took me aback, and at the firm where we often were dealing with opposing counsel in different cities, different states, not somebody we were seeing at a bar luncheon or socializing with necessarily. And I said one day, after having been there for some time, every letter we ended was, and govern yourself accordingly, comma, Melissa Nelson. And with opposing counsel on capital cases where we're litigating about the death penalty and whether a defendant is going to be sentenced to death or not, I had relationships with my opposing counsel where I could have a beer with them when we walked out of court. And that was not the case in the litigation where we were fighting over money. And I found that very interesting. But I think Judge Howard is right. The reason is because some of those lawyers, not only would I never see, but I would never see again at the end of the litigation. I would never deal with again. But the criminal bar, we're in court all day, every day together. And to her point about reputation, once you burn a bridge or lose your credibility in one case, one time with one lawyer, that stays with that lawyer and everybody else remembers it. So I do think there's a lot to be said. That just comes back to proximity, right? When we're around people, when we get to know people, we respect them in maybe a different way than when they're at some level of distance.
Yeah.
One last thing on that. When I speak to our new lawyers every year when we swear them in, one thing I talk about, and I stress this over and again, when you said, is there something you wish you knew then? I was told this about your reputation is the only thing you have, guard the building of it very seriously. But I don't think you can appreciate as a young person how important that is the same way you can, as we can with now years behind us. Every single interaction with another lawyer, with the court, with a client, every email, every text messages, all of those moments they may be small moments when they're considered singularly, but as they grow over the years and they become what is your professional reputation and how you're regarded by your colleagues. And there is, I think keeping that in mind as a young lawyer, well, for those of you that don't go to law school, in any profession, making sure that when you're building your professional reputation in the space in which you're working, and that is very serious, and thinking about how do you want to be thought of in 30 years from now is incredibly important. So that is advice that I would definitely concur with Judge Howard.
One of the things when I was a young general counsel and was really challenged with some things, I always had the picture of someone I worked with who became a judge. This is before Judge Howard, but I always had him in my head. Like, if someday I have to stand in front of him and say what I did, that's my litmus test, right? Like, I know there's a lot of voices that are telling me I should be doing this or I should be doing that, but what would I want to tell? It was Chuck Arnold. What would I want to stand in front of Chuck Arnold and tell? This is what I did. And that, having that picture in your head of like, you might have to explain what you did, like, it just cuts through all of the noise. Like, it becomes so clear.
Yeah. So Gwen, that's so interesting. So maybe like in turning that into advice for younger students is whoever, obviously we would all agree, like finding a mentor is really important. Finding good mentors is important. But when you do, to have a litmus test person in your mind. That's a really good thought.
Yeah.
The other thing,
And-
this wasn't necessarily just in the profession, but I would say what I know today that I wish I had known 30 years ago was the work will take as much as you give it and more. And if you say yes to everything, you are saying no to other things. And understanding that there's so much respect in being able to say, actually, I can't do that, right? Like I'm not going to be able to get that to you next week. And having enough regard for your own self to say, I'm not going to stay up until 2. I'm not going to, get up at 5. I'm like just wearing yourself down. You get a little more experience and you realize oftentimes you can find a way to make it all work. But as a young lawyer, I didn't. As a young lawyer, I just said yes, and I can do it, and I'll do it at the sacrifice of a lot of just personal well-being. So I wish someone had said that to me as a young person.
Unfortunately, I was your mentor, and I was making the same mistake.
It was the way we all did. We all did. And it's funny to me. I've got this sub, like in parentheses, when someone says, will you do something? I have this quiet parentheses that says in the next 24 hours. Like I just imagine I do. And sometimes when I call the question and say, do you need this right now? They're like, no, next week would be fine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my whole life. I've assumed you needed it that fast. But anyway.
That goes back to communication. And we have a question. I'm going to get to that in a minute, Martine. But so much of the practice of law is communicating, whether you're communicating in front of the court in an advocative role, whether you're communicating in a letter and you're trying to succinctly set forth, the basis of your client's request and why it should be considered by the other side in a transaction, or perhaps an employer as you're negotiating an employment contract, whether you're writing briefs, whether communication is key. And sometimes it frequently starts right there in that client interaction where you're like, I won't be able to get to it then. Let's talk about when you really need it and when your timeframes are. And that's a hard lesson, because I suspect if you're thinking of law school and you're already been accepted to University of Florida, all of our attendees are probably very high achievers. And so you want to be able to deliver, and you're not used to disappointing, but in fact, you're just going to set yourself up for possibly disappointing, because you need that balance and you need to know what you can handle and when. So Martine Joseph put a question in the chat that I'm gonna read out, and then whomever wants to take it. The question is, do you all practice law in Florida? If so, what are some of the things you like versus dislike about practicing here? And I think they all do practice in Florida, but given that you were all at McGuire, you probably had cases that were maybe in different states or traveled to different states for business. So whoever wants to take that and answer that for Martine, that would be great.
I'm going to say Gwen.
Well, I'll start the conversation, but I mean, honestly, one of the true things is it's just beautiful. It's like, right, if you have a bad day, you can go to the beach or go to the river, and that's not, when I talk to my friends in Minnesota and New York and it's still snowing, I'm like, oh, I'm so grateful to be here. But a piece of it too was what Melissa talked about, like the collegiality that I think, especially in North Florida, I'll say, that the town is small, and so you're going to run into people again. You will have a reputation. I was on a call today with some lawyers out of Akron, Ohio, but they're at a firm, and I mentioned the person that I know at their firm, and they're like, instantly some credibility from that, because the bar is so small and knows each other so well. So I really appreciate that. And it's funny, I would say 20, 30 years ago, I might have said the sophistication of the work, right, might have been better in DC or New York, but I don't think that's true anymore. Like today, we're able to do some really sophisticated transactions. We're working with lawyers often in the Northeast, and I don't know that the democratization of information has made it so that you really can practice wherever you want. So I obviously was very intentional about picking Florida, and I'm glad that I did.
And I made a conscious decision that I wanted to be in Florida. I was born and raised here in Jacksonville, and I wanted to raise a family here in Jacksonville. That was what I wanted to do. And I clerked my second summer, the first summer out of law school, I clerked for a firm here in Jacksonville. And then the second summer I clerked for a firm up in DC. I loved DC. It was a great experience. But at the end of the summer, I looked at what my work life would look like in Washington, DC, as opposed to what it might look like in Florida. And I thought, I think I have a better chance of having this career and being a litigator for life in Jacksonville, Florida, and having a family as well, than I do in Washington, DC. Because I was seeing at the big firms, I was at a big firm at the time, the women lawyers would get married and start having children, and they would leave the practice of law because there really wasn't a way to balance it at the time. And so when I was looking at it, I was looking at Jacksonville, and I thought, I think I can do my job and have a family better in Jacksonville, Florida than I'm going to in Washington, DC. And that was the right decision for me. It's not going to be the right decision for other people. But I also thought, if I meet someone in DC, what are the chances they're going to want to come back to Jacksonville with me? I may as well just go back to Jacksonville. But that's what caused me to choose to practice law in Jacksonville. But I will echo what Gwen said, and that is it is a very collegial friendly bar. And when I was at McGuire Woods, I represented clients all over the Southeast, and I would go places or practice against lawyers from other places that were not so nice, not so friendly. So I think it's a great area to practice law. And that was also why I went to UF Law. I picked UF Law because I knew I wanted to live in Florida. And I thought, okay, well, if what's the point of going to Vanderbilt, where I'd done undergrad, if ultimately I want to practice at UF, I'm going to make better connections and network with people through law school that are going to have give me a much better ability to impact my career later. And that was why I chose to attend UF for law school.
Yeah, I'll jump in for a minute on that, just because I practiced in 3 different parts of Florida, and I applied to more than University of Florida. And I was accepted to a school in DC. I was accepted to a school in Boston, and then I was accepted to Florida. And in addition to my father saying, there is no decision to be made here, you're going to Florida. I talked to some lawyers, and to echo Judge Howard's point, they were like, think about where you think you're going to end up practicing. Because if you think you're going to end up practicing in my hometown, West Palm Beach, or in Miami, where I practiced for 5 years, then you're going to make those connections. So that's one factor that you might want to consider as you're thinking through the application process. The other thing you might want to consider, let's say you in your heart of hearts want to be an entertainment lawyer. Okay, that may influence where you want to go to law school. It doesn't take Florida off the map, because Miami is actually, there's a lot of sports representation in Miami. There's a lot of music and cultural representation in Miami, but so is there also in Atlanta. So is there, predominantly in California. So those are some things you might want to think about if you're deciding, where do I want to go to law school? If you really think, and again, we've told you may change your mind, but if you really think what area, if you want to be a governmental lawyer, you want to go work for the federal government, well, then you might want to think about, okay, I want to go ahead and start building those connections in DC. So I'm going to see if maybe I can't swing going to law school there because of the cost of living, but maybe that's where I focus on my internships, so that you start having those kind of exposures. But Florida has become a much more sophisticated place. I mean, Miami is the gateway to South and Central America. There's enormous amounts of transactional and international litigation. It's an international arbitration hub, which, you know, a lot of lawyers practice in the arbitration space now, which is basically private judges as opposed to, you know, our state and federal system. So those may be some things. And Melissa, you may have a thought on that, especially since you work probably with a lot of young people through the various programs that your office administers. Maybe you have a thought on that you could give some advice on, you know, is Florida, not University of Florida per se, but, you know, Florida as opposed to other jurisdictions to either go to law school or to practice in.
Well, I'll echo what Gwen and Judge Howard said about North Florida. The bar here, we've got a fantastic bench, and the bar here is just very friendly. People are nice, and obviously the state is beautiful. What we're seeing with young folks, obviously cost of living is becoming more and more difficult for young people graduating with, you know, student debt, figuring out where to go. We often interview kids out of law school who know or believe they want to be a prosecutor, and now South Florida is no longer an option for them because they're being priced out of the housing market. They can't make it work. That's true across the state. That's another topic. So I agree with you. Determining if you can, what you might like to do, and then thinking about the geographic area that would facilitate that desire the most. But obviously a consideration probably for a lot of law students is going to be cost of living. If in fact they're going to do things like start their career in the public sector and not necessarily right out of school go to big law. So anyway, I love it here. I didn't think I wanted to come back here. I wanted to be a DA in Manhattan, and I couldn't figure out how I could swing cost of living. And so then I looked at prosecutor DA's offices in Georgia and several here in Florida, and landed in Jacksonville because I liked the office specifically, and the then state attorney at the time. I liked what he was doing. And so that's how I ended up here. Though I knew it was driven, I knew I wanted to be a prosecutor. I just didn't know exactly, you know, where. And I'm glad it didn't work out in New York.
It's
We are
funny how
too.
those things
Me
happen.
too.
So we have another question, and I don't know if we're going to be able to give you a whole lot of advice on this, Jake, but Jake Hutchinson has asked us, are any of you barred, meaning, you know, members of the bar? And I should say, I'm sure most of you know, when we keep using the term the bar, we don't mean the bar where you might go get a beer. The bar is what they call, you know, if you're a member of the Florida bar, then you're a lawyer who's been licensed to practice in the state of Florida. So Jake's question is, are any of you barred in any states in addition to Florida? And if so, what was that process like? I can't speak to that because I never sat for any other bars, but I don't know if any of you did or.
I'm not.
I threatened my husband with divorce if he wanted to move, and I'd have to take another bar exam. But I have had lots of law clerks that have taken more than one bar exam. And the bar exam is changing. Historically, the advice on that was, if you're going to take more than one bar exam, you want to take it very soon after the first one, so your multi-state score is still valid, and you'll only have to take the state portion of it. And the other reason is sort of the recency. The laws are oftentimes fairly similar. The sooner you take it, the better. And also, if you're going to do that, I would normally, like when I've had law clerks that are going to take the bar exam while they're working for me, I suggest that they take the last 2 weeks before the bar exam off and just do nothing but study, because it's hard to work full time and study for another bar exam. But I have one former law clerk that is licensed to practice in Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee. I mean, because her husband is a doctor and kept moving. And so she kept having to take new bar exams in order to continue practicing. Of course, there are also ways not to have to take a bar exam and still practice in another state. If you're in-house counsel, if you're with the U.S. Attorney's Office, you don't have to be a member of the bar of that state. There are ways to do it. And of course, some states have waivers for military spouses so that they don't have to take bar exams.
Right. And I actually misspoke. I am a member, or was a member for several years, of the U.S. Virgin Islands court. But that was really because I had a major medical peer review case down there, and their bar was very closed. So they were going to make sure that I had to go through the process of becoming a member of their bar in order for me to represent a hospital down there. But that was really more a matter of taking a written test, which was more about their procedures, and then paying the money to join their bar. It wasn't the comprehensive, we will never forget taking our bar exam kind of bar that you do in Florida. And the good news is Florida has a reputation of being one of the more difficult bars. So if you do end up going to Florida, but you think you're maybe going to end up practicing in Atlanta, or you're going to end up practicing in Boston, like Judge Howard said, you can take those classes that will get you ready for that, and take, and you should be in fairly good shape if you've sat and passed the Florida bar. I hope that helps, Jake. We might need to find you a lawyer that's done that, maybe offline, and be able to connect you with them. I'm sure we can all think of somebody. Okay, so there's a question here for you, Judge Howard. After practicing civil law, as long as you did, how difficult did you find it to now judge both civil and criminal cases?
I was intimidated by that. One thing that helped was, so when you become a judge, after a few months, you get to go to what we fondly refer to as baby judge school. And everybody goes around the room and introduces themselves. And I was very worried that I had no criminal background, and was concerned about that as a judge. But when we went around the room, I found that there were people like me who are civil litigators that didn't have any criminal background. Then there were AUSAs, or criminal defense lawyers, who had practiced in federal court and become judges, that knew everything about criminal and knew nothing about civil. And then there were state court judges that were now federal judges who knew civil and criminal, but they didn't know anything about federal court. And so everybody had a learning curve. There were very few people, there may have been one or two people that had a little bit more experience in the other areas. And so you just had to learn it. And the nice thing about learning the criminal law is criminal cases proceed in it is a very strict progression. There are steps that have to happen in every case. There are evidentiary issues or motions to suppress that don't actually happen in every case, but when it would happen. And so learning that structure, that was a little bit more narrow than learning and then dealing with sort of a civil practice, because in civil practice, you'll have the cases that just do the normal progression of complaint, answer, summary judgment, but then you also have arbitration petitions, and you have ERISA cases that are handled differently. You have Hague Convention cases that are handled differently. So the criminal, I realized after the fact, was at least more narrow to learn. Although, again, by far the hardest thing that I do, by absolute far the hardest thing I do, is at the end of the case when I'm sentencing a criminal defendant. There's nothing that equals that.
Right. And that's a good point, because I can remember in my days as a federal law clerk, the amount of work that went into sentencing, and the reports that were issued on both sides, hearing from, if there was a victim, back in my time, it was a lot of drug cases, huge multi-jurisdictional drug cases, but hearing from the defendant if they chose to speak, hearing from letters that are written on their behalf. The court puts an enormous amount of time and effort into considering that, and has wide discretion within the guidelines to make those decisions. And that would be a heavy burden, certainly, for a jurist to carry. I mentioned that I had applied to a couple different law schools and then ultimately, and I think for all the right reasons, chose Florida. Did any of you apply to law schools other than Florida? And what guided your decision-making process in your final selection?
I already answered that, so you guys go.
You know, I would say my decision was a little earlier. So I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, and went to George Washington in DC because I was going to be a lawyer. So I thought I had to go to DC. That's the only thing that made sense to me, this my 17-year-old brain. And at the end of that first year of school was down here in Ponte Vedra. My brother was in the Navy and he let me stay in his apartment for the summer. And at the end of the summer, I had a moment, sounds like Judge Howard's moment of like, where do I want to be 20 years from now or 30 years from now? And that was the moment where I said, I don't want to practice. Frankly, it's as shallow as this. I don't want to practice where it snows. Like I'm not interested in snow and shoveling snow and being cold. So I made the decision to finish school here and made the decision that practicing here, Florida really was the best place. I also, and I said this a little earlier, finished a bit early, and UF at the time had a January start. So I could I could start in January. So for all of those reasons, like I really applied kind of early on because I started at UF in January. So I didn't apply to law school anywhere else. I sort of jumped around a little bit before that.
Right. Well, and that was probably that obviously informed your decision. I mean, the snow factor was a no-go.
Yeah,
so you were,
it was
and
and the price, right? Like I would have ended up with student loans in a very, very different, had to make different decisions, and going to a state school and being getting residency before I did had a huge, had just a different trajectory, gave me more options, which I was very, very grateful for.
Right. That was part of my decision not to go to Boston was, what if I don't like being a lawyer and I owe $75,000 in student loans and, I'm going to be working 3 jobs to pay those off. But, and there's a wide variety of law schools here in our state now. I mean, we have FSU, which has great connections to the state capitol and opportunities for students that go there. Little easier for them to intern and shadow and things like that. I mean, I interned in Tallahassee for then Governor Graham and had to go, move to Tallahassee, find a place to live, etc. But, we have FSU and the connections to the Capitol. You have FIU, which has good connections to the international legal arena of South Florida. You've got Stetson, which traditionally was known sort of as a black letter law and has graduated a lot of really good prosecutors and trial lawyers, great trial teams. University of Miami, a little pricier, but again, you have that flavor of U of M, a smaller law school. So we have a lot of options here. Even if, you're wanting to explore beyond, okay, I'm going to apply to Florida. I don't know if this is true anymore. Sarah, you might know, but and it used to be that when you were an undergrad at Florida, you got to apply to University of Florida Law School for free. And I don't think it was a huge application process, but, that was another factor. Well, why wouldn't you apply, and at least see, so you have options, and options are good because then you can go visit and you can talk to, you can find graduates from those schools and you can talk to them as well. This might be our last question, and then we're going to see if there's any other question from me, and we'll see if any of our audience have more. What was a challenge that you faced either in law school, and we've talked a little bit about how we don't believe in getting too stuck in what you think your path might be, but early in your career that you had to overcome, and how did that really help you in ending up where you are now? Melissa, you want to take that one?
I can't think of us. I would just echo what Judge Howard said. You graduate and you don't know how to be a lawyer. And I started in a place where we now try to provide, well, we do provide a 3-week training program. But then I showed up on a Monday and I was given 300 cases and shown where the courtroom was. And
This is why I didn't do it. I crumbled in that. That sounds stressful just hearing you say it.
So I guess there's not a distinct challenge I remember, but figuring out and learning how to be a lawyer. And I would just echo what they said, finding good people and I tell young lawyers this all the time too. Be aggressive and ambitious about finding mentors, because lawyers will help. They want to teach. In my experience, both Judge Howard and Gwen are awesome at certainly mentoring young lawyers. But I think lawyers, they like to teach. They want to share their craft. They want to share what they're good at. But often they're busy, right? So you just have to be willing to say, I'll be the 4th chair on this. I'll carry the briefcase. I'll do the running on the case, or whatever it may be. So, and I think if you do put yourself out there and you seek opportunity, there's plenty of opportunity. So I would say just figuring out how to be a lawyer. And then, in state court criminal practice, we don't write. We're on our feet and thinking on our feet. And so that is a skill that you have to hone and maintain. And by the time I left the state attorney's office and went to the firm where writing is what you do all day, every day, I had a steep learning curve. So I encourage people that come to our office, while we don't do it as a matter of practice here, it's not like federal court where the lawyers, much of what is decided is often on the papers. It's something that if you get out of law school and have a law degree and you're practicing and not writing routinely, you have to somehow figure out how to maintain that writing skill. It's really important. It goes back to your point about communication, learning to communicate. And I'll wrap it up with this because that's coming to my head now. And I will say for younger people now, it's very different than when we were coming up. So correspondence or communication is much faster, much more colloquial. Being able to write a organized, succinct email is important. Like that's an important skill as a lawyer. It's certainly important when you're communicating with a client. Obviously, being able to write compelling pleadings or briefs to a court is an important skill, and not one that everyone has, but being able to communicate clearly is really important no matter what avenue you take in law. So I definitely went meandered there a little bit, but anyway.
No, that's helpful, and that's really true. And there may be, when you're meeting with your advisors, there may be some very specific advice and classes that they can steer you to that will give you that opportunity to write. I took a class a million years ago that was it was a business writing class, and we had to learn how to write a letter. Well, I'd never written a letter other than to my grandmother, probably, so it was a good skill because communication's key. Gwen, do you have anything to add, like something that you a real challenge or what appeared to be an obstacle in the middle of the road that you had to overcome, and how it helped get you where you are now?
I feel like I've talked a bit about some of the obstacles, but as Melissa was talking, I will say the thing that I had to learn, and I think all of us had to learn, is really negotiation skills. So whether you're a litigator, whether you're a corporate lawyer, what our clients really value is reading the room, knowing what other people are thinking, knowing what's 5 steps ahead, right? And helping them negotiate. So, that wasn't, to Judge Howard's point and Melissa's point, you don't learn true negotiation skills in law school. You might take a class, but that is not really teaching. You learn by watching people do it successfully and people do it unsuccessfully, and seeing and those experiences and putting yourself in as many of those experiences as you can. Like Melissa was saying too, like, let me just go along and watch you negotiate, or let me be on the phone call while you're handling whatever. And that transcends litigation or corporate transaction, right? That is what makes you invaluable to your clients. Is a lot of people can draft the document. That's not the thing that people really appreciate. They appreciate solving a problem and learning how to do that, and understanding people, and understanding how they work. So I think that's really critical.
And there may be opportunities for you to shadow. When we talk about, okay, you're not in law school yet, but you're leaning heavily towards that decision and you want to have some exposure. Maybe you don't have the opportunity to have a full summer internship, at a public defender or a state attorney's office, but maybe you can find a law firm where you're doing some of the grunt work, but they're also, and they can do this with appropriate disclosures to their clients and obviously confidentiality on the part of the shadow E, but where you would have an opportunity to sit in and be part of a deal as a listener, and start picking up on those skills and deciding, is that something that gets me going and I want to try it. Debate is a lot of lawyers who came from the debate field talk about how debate, even though it's very esoteric in some of the manners in which, the categories of debate, that debate was a very helpful way for them to learn how to listen, think on their feet, respond quickly. University of Florida has undergrad debate programs. You didn't have to just debate in high school. So that might be an opportunity. Is there anything any of you could recommend to the students that might help them prepare for law school? We've talked about communication, we've talked about writing, negotiation. Is there anything else that you could think of that might give them a leg up, either in the application process or in getting in?
I mean, I think, as I said earlier, anything you can do that gives you exposure to the law. I mean, when I was an undergrad, I volunteered to work with the victim witness program at the Davidson County State Attorney's Office. So I would go there for 4 hours a day and read arrest warrants and determine if there was a victim or witness that needed to be logged into the system. And then I would, put in that information. It was fascinating reading arrest warrants and seeing how things, why somebody got pulled over, or how law enforcement became involved. It just sort of confirmed for me that this was something that I really wanted to pursue. And so I think, to me, while you're in college, any opportunities you have to expose yourself to different areas of the practice of law, just to get tastes of it, again, to see what it's like, I think that's the best thing you can do, other than, of course, making really good grades, because you've got to get good grades. And as Gwen and Melissa have said, you've got to be able to write. You've got to be able to communicate in the written word. No matter how smart you are, you're going to need to be able to do that. So that's what I would say. I'm not sure I can think of anything else.
And just following up and adding to that, I do think really trying to build some one-on-one relationships with people who are doing what you think you want to do. And I say that because a lot of people think they want to go to big law, for example, and they get in there and within a year or two are so disillusioned, and it wasn't what they wanted. And here they are, they've spent all of undergrad, years of law school, 2 years out, they think they are going to love it, and they don't, for a myriad of reasons, lots of different reasons. But talking to someone who's doing what you want to do and really hearing, what is that day-to-day life like, and is that something that I could see myself doing? I think when I started practicing law 10 years out, I was the only woman that was still practicing law full-time that was part of my class as a first year. Every single one had left. I think it's different today, and I'm not trying to, I think the firms are behaving differently and understanding that the difference of work-life balance. But I still, there was a moment in time when we sold all the assets of a company, and I had to go do something different. And I went and talked to the city about going to work at the city, because I thought those transactions would be really interesting. Just like literally having one-on-one. What is your day like? What do you not like about what you do? Like, and seeing whether you can do that, because there's a lot of people get out there and realize that isn't what your example of environmental law, right? You thought you were going to like it, but it turned out not to. So
yeah, and it's funny how, I mean, I've done a lot of different things in my legal career, and some of that was situational. I mean, I had my children late, and I didn't want to be flying in an airplane every Sunday night and taking depositions somewhere. And so I pretty much, took me a while, but I stopped litigating other than federal court employment cases, because those I could at least mostly control, and that was a big shock to me, is how little I was actually in control based other than what I thought was going to happen. I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to run the show. No, I'm going to answer to the court. I'm going to answer to my client. I'm going to answer to my partners. I'm going to answer, to the other lawyers involved in the matter. So it's a lot of balancing and planning, but yeah, I didn't want to be an environmental lawyer, but I did land use litigation and administrative land use. And that was really my passion. That was probably, part of my career that I still love. I don't do it I have one case now, but not much, but it will take you different places based upon what you need in your life. And, for example, Judge Howard, you mentioned that you said to your husband, I'm not, don't move because I'm not moving with you. But some people have no choice. Maybe they're married to someone who's in the service, or maybe they're married to an AUSA who had a chance to go, get a great position with a different office. And you're going to have to be willing to, modify and change.
I will say, I mean, I said that to him, but I said it in jest. We actually almost moved twice in our marriage, once to North Carolina and once to California. And I was dreading those bar exams, but I would have taken them.
Right. And at least at least he wasn't moving you to like North Dakota. So, you had options.
Yeah, the other thing I would say real quick with the undergrad, I volunteered as a guardian ad litem when I was in undergrad, and that gave you like an exposure to the legal system and legal process, and the work you do is really important work. So finding ways to just understand what the day in the life is like, and I think is good, and probably helps with your law school application too, to show that you really do have a passion for that work.
Right. And I think that we are getting some additional funding in the guardian ad litem space. I think there was a law that Governor DeSantis just signed. So that's a great recommendation for the students, that you all might want to expose that. What that means is guardian ad litem is, in certain situations, the court needs to appoint someone who represents the interests of one of the parties before them. So say, for example, there's a matter that involves a minor, and the minor needs to have someone speak on their behalf relative to the issue. And so there's a guardian ad litem office in all of our jurisdictions that will appoint a guardian, and then you as an undergrad can volunteer in that office and see, you'll have exposure to the courts, you'll have exposure to what is the matter at issue, that and it's a real opportunity to provide a public service. So that's a great example of something that might build out your resume as you're going to apply for law school. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Sia, would you be interested in sharing with your fellow Gators how your experience was for the summer?
Yeah, I would love to. Are you talking about my time with Advos with Gwen, or at the state attorney's office?
Well, I didn't realize you had both. So how about both?
Yeah. Oh, sure. All right. So I love a lot of different areas of the law. And obviously, there's two main types. And with those two types is thousands of other fields. I'm learning new ones still to this day, like, oh, AI law, this and that. So I love getting to explore each and every one of them as much as I can. Um, so with the state attorney's office, I learned a lot. There's a lot of moving parts that you wouldn't expect to go into each case. A lot of different, ways of communicating and lots of different types of people that are involved in these cases. So I really enjoyed getting to process evidence. There's a very cool historical building. The state attorney's office is actually in the old federal courthouse. So there's a lot of different elements to the building even that are very cool. You get to learn from a lot of gators. There was a lot of gators in the department I worked in, which was targeted prosecution, which I believe is a newer department that Melissa was able to create, which is wonderful. I got to sit in on, you know, yeah, how they enter each piece of evidence and how they, decide all of that in a big room. And, it's pretty fascinating stuff. You get to sit in on court proceedings and trials and just a lot of things that are, going on in the local news. And you see these things, I would come home and my sisters would be like, oh, isn't this the case you were telling me that you are getting to learn about? And I'm like, yes. Like, this is so fascinating. So I'm not very interested in criminal law. That might change, but still an invaluable experience. Got to meet a lot of wonderful people, and I am so happy I did that. And with Advos, I got to, first of all, learn from two amazing women who are moms and who do literally everything, have so many cool interests. Getting to learn from them was just amazing. One of my good friends, actually, she had started working for them first. Her name is Alex Hess. She is in law school right now at UF, and there was an opening at of a position to clerk with them. So I did that, and it was great. It was actually during COVID, so it was great to have Monday meetings, and we just talked about everything, like our personal goals, our professional goals, and it's also kind of daunting to have goals to become a mother and do all these things and also want to pursue your career. And these women were just awesome. It really reassured me, knowing that I could do it all, and you just have to learn from the right people. So that was great. And Whitney Harper, she's another lawyer for their firm, and she actually wrote my letter of recommendation for law school. So I definitely would recommend trying out different legal internships. I mean, I would have never thought that I would love the small firm feel of like a couple lawyers, but those were probably my best experiences working for small to mid-sized firms. Like, you never know when like a different experience will point you in the right direction or give you new insights. So I absolutely loved working for both of those internships. Very, very different internships, but very great nonetheless. So
Well, great. And where have you applied?
So I applied to just Florida schools because I'm staying in Florida the rest of my life. I love it here. UF Law, Miami Law, Florida State, and Ave Maria Law, which is like a small Catholic school down in Naples. Right now, I'm making my decision within a week, so I'm really excited to see where I'll be in the fall for law school. But yeah, it's really exciting.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So I think we're wrapping up, but I wanted to give anyone a chance to ask any additional questions. Raise your hand and I have to look or put a question in the chat and we'll make sure we get to it. And then I would just invite our panel members, if you have any last thoughts or comments or encouragement we want to give the students if they're considering the career. I think what's nice is you've heard from 3 panel members who clearly love what they do. And, that's really important. Law school is not prison and neither is any law job you take. You do get to go out the door if it doesn't fit, but I think it's nice to realize it's a demanding profession, but it's also an incredibly rewarding one. And so best of luck to everyone. And then I'll turn it over to the panel for any final comments, and
I
we'll see if we
have
have
a
any
couple
last
of
questions.
I have a couple of final thoughts. One thing that Gwen said that really resonated with me that I think is probably true no matter our fields, whether it's like Judge Howard sitting, on the bench, or Gwen with a client advising them, or us working with victims. As lawyers, we solve problems. And that's probably something everybody contemplating law school is attracted to do on behalf of other people. So having a problem and figuring out how best to solve it. And I would say that has been probably what gives me my greatest satisfaction. And the last piece of advice that I have not been myself very good at, but while I was going through my legal career, started to appreciate the value of, and if I had it to do it all over again, would have gone about this differently. Wherever you end up in law school and the friends you forge and the people that you meet, maintaining that network as you move through life, your professional career. Law is changing rapidly, and you never know when you might be at a crossroads and looking to do something different. And those folks will be people that you can lean on for advice or potentially open doors. And to Gwen's point, I realized probably 15 years in my career, your colleagues, whatever it is they do, they're going to make moves too. They might end up in-house and being promoted through an operational chain where one day they're hiring lawyers for whatever problems they have or needs that they have. And so just maintaining those relationships and making sure that your colleagues know what you're doing, and if you change career paths, what you're doing again, so they think of you and you come to mind when they might have business to send you or a need where they could use you. So that's important. I'm not in obviously a position now where I'm need to generate business. I have plenty on my desk every day, but that is something I think that you should be thoughtful about as you graduate, is maintaining the network that you build in law school. We've talked a lot about building a mentor network after and in your professional career, but still touching those people that you go to school with, because you'll find, I thought law school was fun, and you forge really, you're working hard and studying hard, but you create, really good friendships too. So maintaining those is important. And thank you for having me. This has been great fun to be with my friends too. This is nice. So thanks.
Any last comments, Gwen or Judge Howard? And we do have one last question too. So maybe I should ask that first.
I will say, recently Judge Howard swore in another one of our law clerks who clerked for us for a little while and then went off to William and Mary, and then came back and clerked with Judge Howard this past fall. And when he was ready to be sworn in, he had Judge Howard swear him in. And she read our oath, the Florida Bar oath of why am I blanking? Admission. Thank you. And I would really encourage anyone who thinks they want to be a lawyer to read that again. It was so moving to remember that it is truly a profession, and it is truly a privilege to do the work we do. We are given the privilege to appear in front of a court. We take on the obligation and the responsibility to do it ethically and morally, and to do it in the best interest of our clients, but also within the bounds of law. And we are the protectors of that law. We take it seriously. And Judge Howard reminded, although we don't need it, that we get the butt of jokes left and right. And so to be reminded that it really is a noble profession, noble calling, and important work to do. And if you're going to take that path, be up for that challenge, because there will be moments when that is tested.
That is actually a perfect segue to our question, because one of our students asked, I'm looking at a few law schools, and one emphasized their focus on morals and justice, before getting into the laws and legalities. I'm wondering if this is a path common of law school or somewhat unique to that law school. And I think what you just heard is we would like to think it's unique to our profession. And the oath of admission is all about that. I mean, it really is a very eloquent statement of what you are pledging as being admitted to the bar, of upholding, you know, zealous advocacy, but within the bounds of law and respect and civility. Doesn't always work that way, boots on the ground, but that's what good lawyers strive for. And that really focuses too on the focus that you heard about reputation. And then Judge Howard, if you have any final comments, please share.
Well, going back to that question, the one thing that I would say is I would want to know what they mean by that, because I think all law schools endeavor to teach people ethics and professionalism and endeavor to graduate lawyers that are going to be the models of professionalism. So I would want to know from them what it is that law school says they're going to do different than other law schools to have that emphasis. I'd be curious about that. But in terms of final remarks, the one thing I'll say is thank you for letting me share this time with you all and with my friends, Melissa and Gwen, who we've all known each other for a really long time. And our careers have crossed in different ways throughout the last 30 years. And what Melissa said is right. Relationships are really important. You never know what client you're working for now that'll end up wanting to being across the table from you next time, or being in a position to help you or to hurt you. And then I'll say that to you all one thing, just because it's a little bit of a passion of mine. If you are successful in becoming a lawyer, and I suspect that many of you will be, please don't forget that one of the things that you say in the oath is that you will represent those who are unable to afford attorneys. Please make sure to carve out time to represent individuals who just can't afford legal representation. We have a huge gap in the availability of legal representation. And some of the most rewarding experiences that I've had have been in the pro bono work that I did. And just ironically, and not by any plan, I, as a young lawyer, was asked to do a pro bono matter that I probably spent over 100 hours on. I hadn't intended to, but it just kind of became that. And fast forward years later, when my name had come out of committee to be a federal judge, the individual that I helped was no longer working at Baptist Hospital. She was now Senator Nelson's Northeast Florida representative in his office. So now here was this person working with Senator Nelson that could say, this lawyer helped me. This lawyer pro bono did all these things. So not only did I have that rewarding experience of getting to help someone, but later it paid it forward. So just keep in mind that being a lawyer isn't just about making money. It's about helping those people who can't help themselves.
Yeah, that's a great ending comment, because that is true. It's part of our oath of admission. We have a lot of programs in the state where you can either, you know, volunteer your time. Some of the at the undergrad level, I don't know how much opportunity that there is. There's probably a lot that I just don't know about. We mentioned the guardian ad litem program. You know, there may be city attorneys who have summer internships that, you know, have programs that are, you know, assisting, maybe not pro bono assisting people who can't afford a lawyer, but certainly assisting in the community. And I think those are things that law schools look for. And they really have focused over the last 10 or 15 years on teaching more about professionalism, not just the ethics that we all are guided by, which are sometimes dry and hard to understand in plain English, but also just the idea of service. And, you know, I'm always encouraged in any work I do with the university, and I have a chance to meet you know, students, just how important that is to most of our students. And that's wonderful, because if you're going in it just to make money, you might make some money, but it's not going to be as fulfilling of a life as if you go in it with, you know, the idea that you're going to be able to support yourself, but you're also going to give back. So thank you for all those comments, and thank you, panel members. It was such a privilege to be here with you, and hear your insight and unique perspectives and paths that crossed and have crossed again, and I'm sure will too. Thank you, all of our students, for signing in and listening, and thank you for your questions. And I think that's it, I believe, and I'm going to leave this to the professionals, but I believe that there will be a recording of this, and there'll be a way that you all can review it again, or if a friend of yours happened to miss it, you can pass along that information and they can find it. I don't know exactly how that's going to happen. So Lauren, I don't know if you want to put a message in the chat, or if that's just something that you're going to be sending out to everyone.
We do have a recording, and TBD on how it will go out, but those who registered should get that recording emailed, I believe, but more information to come.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. We're getting a lot of great comments of appreciation to the panel. With that,
And thank you
we'll
to
say good
everyone.
afternoon.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.